everyone. This is Kate from the Your Courageous Life podcast, and this is still the Your Courageous Life podcast, but I am partnering with my friend Andy Sewell for a special 9-part series focusing exclusively on lessons from my book, The Courage Habit. Listen in as we talk about how you can apply the psychology of courage and the neuroscience of habit formation to your life to create lasting behavioral changes. If you've ever wondered how someone can learn the skill of being more courageous in their life, this special Courage Habit series that I'm embedding within the larger Your Courageous Life podcast is it. It's going to have a little Courage Habit themed intro, outro, but again, it's still the Your Courageous Life podcast, just a special little 9-part series where we do a deep dive into the courage habit and how you can apply it to your life. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Courage Habit Podcast, an exploration of the Courage Habit, the book and program designed to break the fear-based habits holding you back and replace them with the courage-based habits to enjoy the life you want. The Courage Habit was written by Kate Swoboda. She's a life coach, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, and director of the Courage Living Coach Certification Program. In this limited series podcast, I'll be asking her questions about the book and her experiences teaching her techniques.
And he's Andy Sewell, an audio producer who has started a new career after 2 decades of corporate work. Andy is an amazing storyteller, he's ferociously curious, and he's someone who has read The Courage Habit. So he was the perfect person to ask about hosting the Courage Habit podcast. You can learn more about Andy at audioephemera.com.
Each episode of the series is a continuation of our conversation. If this is your first time listening, please subscribe to the podcast so you can start from the beginning. Thank you for joining us, and let's get back into the conversation.
One thing that I wanted to ask about the critic and specifically our reaction to it is you talk about either avoiding behavior, pleasing behavior, attacking behavior. So that's our reaction to what the critic is known. In your example, when the critic says, "What are you thinking?" and you just lash back out and kind of scream back at the critic. And the pleasing one is you just go along with it and say, "Okay, I totally agree with you, critic. I'm going to do whatever you need me to do. Thank you for your information." And you treat it as almost like a coddling criticism. And then avoiding is what I was talking about for myself. I'll just go do something else and do the dishes and get distracted enough that I don't have to think about the thing that was at hand that the critic was criticizing me for. Are those reactions ever really tied to a situation that we should pay more attention to when we're choosing one of those over another? Is there any relationship between those and our actions that give us information of why we might be acting that way? Is there a different, version of fear that we listen to the critic in those moments?
That's really interesting. So are you asking me if one type of reaction tends to come up more than others related to certain scenarios?
Exactly. Is there something that those make sense to me? All of those reactions are things that I'm sure that I've done and I can think about times I've done. But is there a relationship between why we choose that tool to react to a particular critic voice? Does that mean anything to us about where we're at?
I have never thought of that before. So this is an intriguing question. I have not, my immediate response is that I have not seen that there is a specific type of reaction that is always tied to a specific type of, or most of the time tied to a specific type of scenario. And I'm just kind of running through a couple of things in my head, thinking about, because, I've used examples when I talk about things that arouse my own fear, a big restructuring of roles in my company. And I can see the places where in that scenario, I got more avoidant, but I can think of other times I've been challenged in my company. And instead of getting avoidant, it was attack mode. God, why didn't I do this better? Things like that. How about you? I'm going to turn the question around and ask if you notice that there's a pattern, because I haven't noticed that there's a pattern, but that could just be me.
I do. And this is kind of where I was hiding the question in that. I've noticed that when I do an avoiding behavior, so doing the dishes instead of the task, I do not feel confident in the task at hand. I have a sense that, oh boy, it's going to become pretty apparent pretty fast that this is something that I'm going to struggle with. Obviously, when there's an obligation, if it's a client work or something, I still move forward with it. But my initial behavior is to avoiding. When I'm doing the pleasing, I've often found it's something that maybe is uncomfortable and I don't really want to do anyway. And attacking is something that I feel like I really want to do, but I'm feeling a little frustrated with how to just get going and how to get started, or how I'm visualizing it. Attacking is more of maybe a crude reaction where I just don't know enough, but I have an overwhelming desire to carry out something, and I push back that I really want to do it. And that's the two dichotomies. One where I really don't want to do it and I kind of take the advice, and then one where I really want to do something and I end up expelling a lot of energy fighting against the critic. And I don't know if that particularly means that the task at hand is more important or less important when I have different behavior. I've just noticed that my intention, my energy behind something seems to inform my reaction to the critic.
Wow, that's really great knowledge. I feel like the nerd in me would be like, you need to make a flowchart of that or something and put it up on the wall. Like if I saw that pattern in myself, I would probably make a little Post-it note flowchart and put it on the wall for 30 days, because I would be really interested in trying to use that as a tool to be even more aware. I haven't noticed with those three reactions as much. What I have noticed with myself is that with the fear patterns, which are perfectionism, people pleasing, I called it martyrdom in the book, but if I had the book to do over again, I'd just call it people pleasing because it's a little easier for people to recognize. So perfectionism, people pleasing, pessimism, and self-sabotage. And what I have noticed is that I have certain patterns, like at the outset of a project, my perfectionist is like riding high, like, yeah, we're going to go in there, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and it's going to be perfect, and this is going to go this and this. And then if a cascade of things don't go according to plan, getting really exhausted and going into pessimism, like, well, why did I even think that, look, they did it better. Why did I even think my idea was anything hot or new, or, things like that. And I've noticed that with clients as well. Now, each of the 4 fear patterns tie to, I think, avoidant, attacking, or pleasing responses, right? Like the fear pattern of people pleasing ties into the reaction of people pleasing. The perfectionism and the pessimism can fall into attack mode. Avoidance is pretty clearly self-sabotage. So I think the 4 fear patterns that I've seen in all of my clients fit with those reactions pretty nicely. And with all of these patterns and these reactions, I've yet to meet anyone who only does one. We all do all of them. We just do them to different degrees. Like I would definitely say that my perfectionist is a lot more active than my people pleaser. I'm pretty good at not getting guilted by other people and what they want or their agendas, or thinking that I'm a bad person if I prioritize something I need to do. But it's all contextual. As a mother, I've absolutely felt mom guilt about, why am I not prioritizing what my daughter wants in this moment, even if I've already spent, the entire morning playing with her. And then I want to go do something that's related to what I want to do. I feel the guilt if she's like, well, but mom, can we do one more thing? So it's contextual for me in that way, but it is not quite the same as what you described. So I think it's really great information that you have about yourself. And to me, it's really an acknowledgement. It's worthy of an acknowledgement that you've noticed that much. That's really helpful.
I think I'm just going to start tracking it and see if I see any patterns. I think it's a useful tool we do this naturally, right? We know, I don't want to go to that restaurant because every time I do, I have a bad experience. And so you avoid that. Or maybe you avoid a task at work because, this is the one that really drags me down. And every time I do it, I feel like I'm inadequate. I'm just barely doing what I'm expected to do and kind of turning it in sheepishly. I think we all have those little tasks in our mind, and it doesn't seem to matter how many times we go about them or different ways we approach them. We still kind of come away feeling like this is something that we're just never going to be successful at. And I've noticed that those habits and my reaction to it fit well in those, and they kind of go hand in hand. So in the minute that I'm alerted that something has to come up to do, I embody that reaction and start to avoid the behavior that I'm supposed to be doing and kind of run away from it. And so I'm curious if I can kind of parallel those. If not, I think it's just good information because it does mean I'm pausing. and I'm looking at something from a different perspective.
You got it. And that pausing is the thing that'll enable you to shift the habit. And usually we aren't able right away to simply know what our patterns are and then do it differently the next time. Usually what happens is the pattern starts to run yet again, and there's some moment of awareness or a pause to say, oh, what's going on here? And then it's like, okay, let me turn this back around. So, I mean, that's really, really helpful. And then you can tie it in with, what are the things that I'm feeling? How do I access the body in these moments when I notice the pattern running? What am I saying to myself? What about what I'm saying to myself is a story of limitation that I buy into? Could I reframe it? And how could I get additional support? Am I generally feeling pretty supported by the wider community? And again, community is not just in-person contact, but also books, podcasts, resources. How are those things shoring it up for me so that I don't feel like I'm constantly doing all of this alone?
One big topic that I want to tackle is the definition of story. I know that there's not an easy singular definition for story, and we all have stories that we use to kind of give surrogates of who we are. It might be something as short as, I got my MBA. That tells somebody enough about me. That's kind of like a story in a short little phrase. But we're living increasingly in a world in which that is exactly how people are expected to define themselves. I'm thinking in terms of social media and in the process of getting new jobs, or maybe applying for a school program or to obtain something. We often are tasked to tell the story of who we are. And that can be really difficult for people, because at this moment, when they're trying to make a big change in their life, they're actually trying to tell two different stories, the story of before and the story of what they want. Can you talk a little bit about how you see story, and also how it relates to the kind of malleability that it can be, the beautiful, well-filtered Instagram story that we show the world, versus the internal struggle of the story of trying to overcome something to really achieve what we want?
Well, I think of stories, as I talk about them in the Courage Habit, as being purely those internal narratives. They're the internal narratives, the beliefs or assumptions about who we are or the way the world works. And so who we are, as in stories about what I am or am not capable of, stories about what that diagnosis does or does not mean for what I'll be capable of, stories about what the conditioning we received, the mark it's going to leave on us. And we are always choosing the story we want to tell about ourselves, and we are always choosing the story we want to tell about the way the world works. The idea is that stories are neither good nor bad. It's more so that some of them are just more helpful than others. And so the example I'll frequently give is, we've all met because I think we've all met these people. We've all met this person who goes out into the world, and their fundamental story is that everybody is selfish and only looks out for themselves. So I might as well only look out for myself too.
Yeah.
And then we've all met that person who fundamentally their story is, everybody is doing the best they can. And so there are two different stories about the world. One is, I would say, a fear-based story. The selfish story is one that puts on a kind of armor for someone so that they can have a kind of protection. And one is a more courageous and vulnerable story. Everybody's doing the best they can, which means sometimes in life, even a driver doing the best they can might hit your car. Even the person cooking your food when you do takeout, gross to say, but they might not wash their hands. The person that you fall in love with is going to be a flawed human being. Basically, in this world, shit happens, and we cannot bubble wrap ourselves against that. What we can do is choose the stories that we want to choose and see if they're helpful. If you go to a restaurant and you notice you got food poisoning the last time you were at that restaurant, it's a totally helpful story to go, I don't think I would feel comfortable going there again. If you are in a relationship and you are noticing that every single time you are having a hard day, your partner is just like, I can't deal with you right now. You just need to go deal with your hard day and then come hang out with me when you're in a good mood again. And you're not getting supported. It is helpful to notice, oh, it's a story that I'm not being supported in the way I want to be. This person might think they're offering the support that is best for the relationship. This person's story might be that it works better when people separate when they're having a bad day. That's not actually what I want for myself. So this relationship might not work for me. So it's all about looking at what is the story that you want to attach to about who you are and the way the world works. And I think that these concepts, they need a certain amount of, in today's personal growth world, clarification, because I don't want to be misunderstood. I have absolutely seen coaches and other people in the personal development space say, well, racism is just a story that you tell yourself. And if you would just focus on like love and light and all that, like you wouldn't be so bothered by racism. I'm going, no. We're not saying that things don't exist just because you've decided that they don't exist. Racism absolutely does exist. Racism is absolutely a painful story. But the story that an individual is empowered to choose is, what do I want to do in the face of that? I have dealt with sexism as a woman. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. There have absolutely been times in my life where I have been subject to the threat of rape. Those are terrifying moments. I am absolutely not looking forward to the day when I have to explain to my 6-year-old what rape is and how she can, the best possible ways to protect herself. I want you to always come to me if anything happens, please. All of that. The story I personally choose for myself is that sexism does not get to define who I have decided to be. So the sexism has had an impact on me, but it does not get to define who I am or what I am capable of. I get to choose the story that even though sexism exists, I will continue to speak up and out against it. I will continue to support other people who have been impacted by it. I will continue to be someone who looks at the issues and says, how can I vote or try to change larger systems that prop up sexism? We can do those things with the isms in life. So that is something that I think is pretty important to say, because the concept of the story and change your story and you change your life. Yes, it is absolutely true that the story you choose will have an impact on how you feel day to day to day. But it is not about blindly throwing glitter into the air and just not seeing the hard things in life because you just don't want to see those things.
Maybe in a way, the story we tell ourselves that helps us avoid the things we really do need to change is another version of avoiding the reality of the situation, where we can just write a story that sounds great, but not have to put the effort into manifesting that to be a great story.
You mean, so you're thinking in this case of like the like really pretty Instagram feeds, but that don't really tell the truth about what somebody's going through?
That, and also it satiates an expectation from the outside. I should show you success, and here's a number of ways I can show you success. And it might be the showiness and the kind of glitter of the world of look at the things that I can purchase or the things that I own, and that is a surrogate for success. And that's what's expected. And you're right. The other version that is almost expected is when people have a trauma or experience a frustration, is that they have to authentically tell that story. And in both cases, we're subject to external and internal criticism of whether or not those stories are authentic. And I think that there is room to forgive yourself when you're just trying to do a shorthand of I'm happy or I'm celebrating, and you get kind of trapped, and that your story is really focusing more on maybe the wrong thing, but you feel like it's the story you should be telling.
Yeah. I mean, shoulds are a sign that somebody's living in fear. If somebody is living from that place. I mean, I'm just thinking of a situation. I was friends with someone for a very long time who, not a very long time, I suppose, but the friendship didn't ultimately continue. And it was 100% that thing. There's these beautiful scripty little quotes on Instagram and these posts about my kids never watch TV and stuff. And it's like, your kids are watching TV when they're playing with my kid at my house. I mean, like, yeah, they do. I'm not sure what that was about. why the need would be to present a different issue other than there's some kind of fear there. And I can have a lot of compassion for the fear that's there. Are you asking how someone can get out of that kind of a loop?
Yes, because, what I was getting at, I think, is that stories tend to mean authentic. And I'm thinking in terms of if you told a story about something and somebody else discovers the details is untrue. So if it's a lie, I went to this school and I got this degree and it's not true, there's real consequences. But if it's something that seems somewhat not inconsequential, but my child doesn't watch screens, and then you have evidence to the contrary, the recovery from a story that you've put out there that isn't true seems to be a harder thing to address. It's harder to be honest with your own story and understanding the difference between the story that people are telling you tell the difference between the story that people are putting on you versus the story you're trying to tell. It can get confusing. You can adopt other people's stories for you.
You can. And I think, this is the waking up that people are doing. When people are looking around at their life and they're going, why is my life not working? And they're feeling that fear-based pressure of needing to show up or perform for an audience of some kind, whether the audience is your neighbors or the audience is actually a platform or the audience is your in-laws. And there's this is the shift. It's like that, first there's that got to be that reckoning of, whoa, hold on a second. I don't even know why I'm posting this thing on social media. It's not accurate or authentic. And then there is, then what is accurate and authentic? And how do I get more comfortable with the fact of that and the judgment that might bring? And that is a really tricky thing, because really what you're talking about is other people not liking you for you just being yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. But that moment of exposure, I think that is, that's some of the ongoing work. And really at the end of the day, the work is not how do I be okay with other people not liking me? The work is how do I take back my sovereignty and make sure that I like me? Because I'm just speaking as somebody who has a platform. When I'm writing something and I am worried that somebody else might misunderstand it or not like it, the real work for me is not how do I be okay with the fact that they might not like it? That's part of the work. But the real work is how do I make sure I stand fully behind this piece I'm about to publish? Because if I stand fully behind it, it's like, what's it to me if somebody else doesn't? And this is, part of the stories and listening without attachment. I give this example in the Courage Habit of if you're walking down the street and somebody who is just visibly drunk walks up to you and they're like, you have rainbow hair and it looks so stupid. And they're like, you hear the words, but if you don't have rainbow hair and you don't have rainbow hair, you're not going to be triggered by it. You're going to be like, oh, this person, they had a lot to drink and they are really suffering. That is sad. Let me get away from them. But there's no part of me that if that happened, where I'm going to get into my car walking out of a store and get in my car and after that interaction and go, oh my God, what if I have rainbow hair? Because I'm sovereign. I know I don't have rainbow hair. By the way, for anybody here who has rainbow hair, there's nothing wrong with rainbow hair. I want to make it very, very clear. If you have rainbow hair, I actually think you're probably a really interesting person that I'd want to hang out with. I'm just giving for the sake of example. I don't happen to have rainbow hair. There's no part of me that worries that have suddenly sprouted it just because somebody's been critical. So it's really going, if I don't have a problem with who I am or why I chose to do what I needed to do, it's a lot easier not to get hooked into the idea that I need to perform in the first place, or that what I put out there, if it disappoints other people, is going to be a problem.
So, Kate, we have these stories that we tell, but when we're in a moment of transition, it sometimes can be hard to use the story to explain who we are and then point out that right now we're at a pivot point. And that can feel like maybe the most insecure. It's almost like you're abandoning your story and trying to invent a new one. Can you talk to me a little bit about how the story is adaptive and how it's expanding and you're always creating a bigger story?
Well, the question I would have is, why is it a problem if you're abandoning a story?
Well, maybe, I don't know. My good question.
That's like the piece that I'd break, if you're transitioning from always having been an accountant to being an artist, why is that a problem? For instance, if that's your story. I mean, the question is kind of coming from this place of the identities that we assume in our lives. And I mean, my kind of short take on that is that, of course, to just simply function, there are certain identities that we have. If you ask me, if we meet and you say, what is it that you do? I probably am just going to say, I'm the director of training for a life coach training program. And that's what I would say. Because I'm not going to pontificate about, oh yeah, and I wrote a book. Oh yeah, and I do this. It's just, there you go. It's a little label. But even that label, of course, it's not the full story of who I really am. That is something much deeper and richer and messier and, all the things that are the greatness of being human.
I was thinking maybe it's because when we do tell those stories, we're telling them as a surrogate to maybe give other information in the context of a job interview or maybe meeting somebody for the first time. You're telling these stories to kind of give them that exact information. I want you to have all of this compound information so you understand who I am as a person. And when you say something like, I'm an accountant and I've been working in this industry for this long, other assumptions start coming up. And when you talk about a transition, it feels sometimes like maybe you're abandoning those qualities that either made you successful or were problematic in that history. And that can be equally a positive and a negative story. It's not always the case that a transition is going from something that is never successful to something that is always successful. It's usually a mix in between the two. And maybe changing the story feels like an insecurity point in people's lives.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that, but that's why I have the why is it a problem to shift the identity? Because what I hear in that, if it's an insecurity, is that there's a kind of clinging to identity in general. And that clinging seems like it's really for other people. I really need to show up for the family barbecue and tell everyone that I'm an executive, not that I quit the 6-figure exec job to go write the great American novel, because then what are they going to think? It comes back to that. What's the real problem if you are sovereign in having made that decision with what other people think of that decision? And the problem comes in, certainly there are practical realities. Are you able to pay your bills with that kind of a transition? So there's no ignoring of practical realities. But in terms of the discomfort someone feels, yeah, it's uncomfortable. And it's like I salute anybody going through that transition. I remember going through that experience myself when I was working, a stable salaried job, and then I'm becoming a life coach, which at the time that I became a life coach, reality TV had not yet hit, and there were not yet life coaches on reality TV and all that. And even today, people still are like, well, what does a life coach do exactly? And, but when I became a life coach, I'm a coaching dinosaur. I mean, I became a coach before Facebook, people were definitely like, well, what does a life coach do? And then also I was 25, I think, and people had this idea that coaches somehow know everything about how the world works, and that's the skill set. And people would straight to my face just say, aren't you a little young to be a life coach? You just don't know a lot about life yet. It's just, to me, that's like saying to someone, aren't you a little young to be an accountant? It's like, no, there's a skill here. And the skill is listening for the places where somebody says one thing and does another, asking questions that are open-ended so that the person can come to their own answers. That it isn't dependent on age, and I don't have anyone's life all figured out for them at the age of 25 or even in my 40s now. So there's this place that I would keep going back to there of, and I'm thinking of you in part for this because I know you have had a transition of this nature of switching, not completely. Well, it is a career switch. We'll go ahead and say that. It's a career
Absolutely
switch.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. And it's not that there is an expectation that other people will have of you to have a certain kind of identity. And that's really for their comfort. I actually think you'd be the most interesting person in the room if you started introducing, what do you do? Well, you know what? I used to have a soul-sucking corporate job, and now I am completely pursuing my dreams. And like, it's like, woo, I want to talk to you at the barbecue. Come on. Everybody else is going to be like, well, like, here's what happened at the football game last week. You're the person I actually want to talk to the most. So, and that's how you find your right people, right? The people who are going to judge you for that kind of stuff are not the people you want to hang out with anyway.
I think that's exactly it. By changing or going through a moment where you're saying this was a story and now I'm changing the story or adding on to the story to include this new chapter that I'm in the middle of and I'm burgeoning and I have all this positive energy behind, implies to the listener sometimes that the previous story was a failure, full stop. And that's why you make the transition, because something wasn't working. And while there is some grain of truth in that, I think what the story they're accepting is, despite the fact that you were successful in something or you had a particular experience, it wasn't what you wanted. And so you're shifting. And that is a harder one to accept from, well, you were just fine. You were being successful. You were moving forward. You were stepping up on all of these levels. You were getting attention and achievement and you were growing and everything seemed great. Why would you stop that train of success to do something that starts from a moment of not being an expert and kind of failing a lot while you're working on it? Being motivated by your dreams sometimes doesn't equate the safety net of having a history of success in something else. And I think that's a harder story for an internal person to express outward, because it is fantasy in some people's minds when they hear it.
Well, I mean, there are stories we could pop into there that all have to do with that sovereignty. So how about the story that failure is even a problem?
Yeah.
How about the story of what success, attention, and achievement even are? Again, going back to the example of, being at the barbecue and someone says, well, what is it you do? I just left a really soul-sucking corporate job. I had a long history of thinking that that was success and I wasn't fulfilled. And here's what I do now. And it's like, and if they think you're a failure because you did that, again, it's not as much about what they think. And of course, what they think, especially if someone expresses it unkindly, is going to have an impact on you. I don't buy into this whole, I just don't care what other people think. Well, I don't let it limit my life, but it certainly hurts if someone says something mean. I'm like, come on, I can hear or see the things that people say or do that are unkind, So it's shifting away and coming back to that point of sovereignty, that the ultimate failure would be to stay in the situation that you knew wasn't working and devote your life to something that you knew wasn't working. The ultimate success, this is the reframe of the story. The ultimate success is to take a risk in the name of what it is that you want, even if it's really hard and really difficult and other people might not understand what it is that you're doing. Now, again, I got to throw into this conversation because there are many, many coaches in the industry, many people in just self-help and psychology in general who would not point to this. It is hard when there are practical realities like, how do I have health insurance and how do I have the ability to pay my bills? Those are really practical, very real concerns. I'm not saying throw glitter in the air and just go after your dream and don't care about your mortgage. I am saying, though, that caring about how other people would define you is just such a secondary concern to however you would define yourself. And there are all kinds of stories in there. What is my story about failure? What is my story about what success means? What is my story about how much attention I need? What is my story about what achievement would get me? Because, you and I have a little history that precedes this podcast, and I never heard you talk with vitality or excitement about what it is you used to do. I have absolutely heard you talk with a vitality and excitement about all the different projects that you've been working on since.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Courage Habit podcast, and thanks to Kate Swoboda for joining me. You can find her book, The Courage Habit, wherever you buy your books. Please shop local when you can. You can also find information about her, the Courageous Living Coach Certification Program, and other resources at yourcourageouslife.com.
And you can find out more about Andy and his work at audioephemera.com. That's audio ephemera, EPHEMERA.com.
Subscribe to this podcast to get all the episodes and share it with a friend. Also, please rate the show and leave a review as it helps others discover the podcast. Join us next episode when we continue our conversation about building a courageous life.